Thank you. Also, what's over? It's over. You just tweeted it's over.
Oh yeah. Well, on the topic of black pills, this is when we get to the end of this book, Connor, as I mentioned, and hello everyone. Um, there's get because I just realised Richard Hilton. I think he dies in the 70s, so we're not
This-
going to. Um, he sort of dies at like the tragic. It's a. I mean, in many ways, the book's a tragedy. In some ways, but
Certainly.
anyway, yeah. Um, it's over is something completely different, but also it's on a physical and metaphysical level. And today, of like, there's been quite a heavy amount of black pills on the sort of spiritual and physical level. Um, abandon all hope. So
Well, think. Just remember the ultimate white pill.
the ultimate wipe. What's that?
Christ already won.
Okay. Well, it's looking pretty bleak though.
Well, that's the most exciting time.
Yeah. Well, say that to the British Empire. Anyway, um,
Exactly.
anyway, well, yeah, we'll make a start. So thanks to everyone for joining. This is my first stream of 2024. We're continuing with the Richard Hilton book, Imperial Obituary: The Mysterious Death of the British Empire. There was some smarmy pleb in one of my Twitter replies who went on to say, well, of course it was the Second World War and Britain throwing its weight behind defeating the mid-century German and all that. And yes, that is true to a point. But as we will find out, young sir, we will find out the other aspects of the war, maybe geopolitical um, relationships, which heavily contributed to the fall of the British Empire. But, but that being said, we're not even there yet. We haven't even reached the ascendancy point yet. We are on the ascendancy point because where we left off last time, Connor, it was the I guess you could say the Civil War had finished, the English Civil War that was. William of Orange had taken over, uh, and the puritanical, the sort of extreme Puritans, extreme Protestants, was sort of being removed from power in the colonies because at that point the colonies were sort of left to their own devices, and England was taking more of an active role in governing the 13 colonies. And so at this point, we are focusing on the, uh, I guess you could say, the uh, rivalry between England and France in the New World in North America. And of course, this was all culminating to the 7 Years' Wars and of course the British conquest of Canada. So, Connor, should we begin? Are you ready to begin?
Already. Yep.
Great. So, last time we talked about you know, the uh, some more centralized English control over the colonies and the first rumblings of conflict with the French in North America. And so in the previous chapter, Richard Hilton says that above all, America owe their existence as a nation to the British sailors who wrested the mastery of the Atlantic from the French and Spanish. Um, I think that's a very important point that he raised there, and an accurate statement. So we carry on with, like most head-on collisions between deep-seated but mutually antagonistic human causes, the Anglo-French rivalry festered for many years before it came to a head. The inevitability of a clash became obvious in the outposts long before the rulers in London or Paris realized that there could be no peace but by negotiation when conflicting interests of such vital importance were at stake. The two home governments, it is true, realized fairly early that serious bones of contention existed, but their eyes were set upon Europe, where questions such as the dynastic claim of the Bourbons or the Habsburgs, or the independence of the Low Countries, or the navigation of the River Scheldt seemed to be the things that mattered. All these certainly were things that mattered very much because, in effect, they raised the question on whether France permit was to be permitted to dominate the continent of Europe, but with but they were matters which could be settled and were in fact temporarily settled by a judicious mixture of war and diplomacy. Clausewitz pointed out that war, in his day, was a continuance of diplomacy by more forcible means. Nations rarely fought in those more civilized days, absolutely to the bitter end, till one or both uh, uh, forces faced utter destruction. So it came about that the early Anglo-French wars of the late 17th and early 18th century ended in peace negotiations, which left neither side exhausted, but left the final issue to be tried later. The winner in these limited wars gained certain dynastic or territorial advances. Provinces or cities were surrendered by the loser as pawns in long game. Very often they changed ownership in the reverse direction as part of some later peace treaty, but regarded as a series of moves in huge chess game, the combined results of all this fighting and peacemaking was achievement of Great Britain's long-term aim to prevent France from becoming a strong on the continent that she had been able to force a passage of arms across the Straits of Dover. Among these limited wars can be listed the following: 1689 to 1697 issues mainly dynastic, i.e., French kings' persistent support for the Stuart cause, fought mainly in the Low Countries with French-backed rebellions in Scotland and Ireland, battles of Killiecrankie, the Siege of Londonderry, Siege of Enniskillen, and the Boyne, the Battle of the Boyne. Very important in Northern Ireland, on a bit of a side note, in the Ulster Protestant um, sort of community. Important day. 12th of July. In Belgium, Sting. Oh, shut up, Siri. Sorry, that's Siri interfering. In Belgium, Steenkerk, Landen, and the storming of Namur at the Sea of La Hogue, this war ended in the negotiation of the Treaty of Ryswick, 1697, which gained for the British important dynastic terms but no territorial gains. The importance of overseas possessions was as yet hardly considered at all. 1700 to 1713, War of Spanish Succession, issues again mainly dynastic, i.e., to prevent France from becoming dominant by a union with Spain, fought again mainly in the Low Countries and at sea. Battles Blenheim, Bavaria, Ramillies, Ordanta, Malpayet. I apologise if I'm mispronouncing these places. Capture of Gibraltar, war ended by Treaty of Utrecht in 1713, which gained for the British a defeated of French plans of union with Spain. Permanent retention of Gibraltar to this day. The right of essentio, which is permission for the British ships to trade with Spanish America, uh, and Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. It will be noticed from these terms that British statesmen were slowly realizing the importance of maritime trade and the importance of naval bases. The idea of the empire was spouting, for here in the Treaty of Utrecht, we find that the first time an important transfer of transatlantic territory, France was obliged to cede to Great Britain Newfoundland and Nova Scotia.
It's quite interesting that the sort of economic deal where they're able to trade with with Spanish America, it seems very important to me, and just important element of bringing about economic dominance.
Yeah, and what's quite interesting is that he talks about how, and maybe this has definitely been a recent modern conception, but the idea that war is, whenever there's a war, it has to be total, i.e., that one side has to lose horrifically, like absolutely decimated, and the other side is the victor. Um, of course, the most obvious one is the Second World War, but also like if you think about the Second Gulf War, in sort of in our living memory, where Ba'athist Iraq was, it was um, defeated in a very spectacular and absolute way. But in reality, that sort of conflicts didn't exist back then. Um,
Even World War One seems to be like that too, where it's, uh, everything's taken away, pretty much everything at least, is taken away from those who lost.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that was. Yeah, that's probably a very good example because at that time you saw sort of removal of uh, monarchies, European monarchies, and as we know what would happen, the penalties for the war was put on Germany, and you saw the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian, the Habsburg realm.
Also,
Um,
with that, just like, that in particular, it the element of it sort of provoking traitors in order to take control of a country in order to make it utterly y- um, useless, utterly uh, unable to defend itself, and then starving everyone out.
mm,
I mean, brutal, brutal. Not gentlemen's wars at all. These are gentlemen's wars where barely any territorial exchanges happen.
yeah, and the War of Spanish Succession, and it's probably quite an important one. Maybe it's something that, um, maybe most important because, of course, as he references here, it was the gain for Britain, Gibraltar, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland. Well, if you're, you know, uh, looking at the British Empire through a sort of like, from its start to an end, you probably think, well, that's not really much of a gain. I can see it in the sense, but actually, at the time, that was a very significant gain for Britain. I mean, it was. I mean, that is an absolute victory. I mean, if you want to talk about taking W's, like taking wins, I mean that's a pretty big win. I mean, you
I
can't
think,
deny that's like what the kids say, epic wins, and the France took like a huge L in.
yeah, I mean, I think that actually the bigger victory for Britain is actually not what they is not what they gained necessarily, though that is an element, but what they prevented others from gaining, which
Yes.
they basically backed out of their deal with the Habsburgs and allowed most of Spain, or Spain and its colonies, to go to the Bourbons, and then which was already in decline, and then the Habsburgs just were able to gain um the non-connected elements of the Spanish Empire in Central Europe.
No, absolutely. And also because of the gains that Britain did make, in Gibraltar, in Nova Scotia and Newfoundland, and the access, because remember the Britain, one of the victory conditions in all of this was that Britain was able to trade with Spain's and her colonies, which was, and as we talked about in the previous stream, Spain was very protective. It was a very much a closed market when it came to its trade with even with Spain, with other Catholic sort of friendlier nations towards Spain. Spain was still very protective because it was about maintaining its wealth, prestige, and everything. I mean, it was just their own interest, which makes sense. So that market was opened up anyway because of the War of Spanish Succession, which was also another win for Britain. But on top of that, for Britain to maintain it and monopolize on this, as Richard Hilton points out, they had to. I mean, there was no choice. They had to adopt a maritime, um, a maritime presence, and that had to be there. I mean, more so. I think you see with this. We saw in the Civil War that you had the creation of Cromwell's army, the Model Army, and then the Standing Army. I think with this, it's sort of a reversal where you see the army sort of taking a lesser standing, a lesser role, and you see the emergence of a navy, because that is the future that Britain. That's the way Britain had can main at that time in the 1700s maintain itself is through a standing, powerful navy that can rival, uh, you know, France and Spain.
Yes. One of the things also another element of sort of the diplomatic revolution that happened under, sort of the first under the Cromwell government, which turned against France because the Stuarts were much closer to France in allies, and then once the Stuarts were overthrown in '88, then it was the electors, or not electors, William III came in and he solidified the Dutch alliance, which created sort of the situation where they could gain these territories and this influence.
Yes. I mean, looking into Cromwell, one of the things that I think he, was quite interesting is during his time, maybe not unwarranted from his point of view, but it definitely clouded his vision. Is his obsession with Spain, Catholic Spain, and the threat of Catholic Spain.
Yeah,
Definitely, he didn't. He let the ball slip when he came to France, which was at that time an emerging threat as well. And this was something that had to be dealt with later by, um, I guess, the Brit the by the newly created Britain in the Spanish Wars of Succession, and vice versa, and in later conflicts. Um, and the thing though is, we'll probably get into later on in this, much later on in this book, but that sort of thing, that sort of way of thinking, does happen again with Churchill and with the war, because the obsession with defeating National Socialist Germany and Germany, um, i- at the same time, they completely ignore the rise of communism in Europe, which would then,
not just ignore, but sort of financially
well, they
and
find out, yeah, they would
uh,
finance it, and then
yeah.
and shockingly, I guess, believe that Stalin would allow all these, Eastern European nations that was under his belt after the war, that he would allow them free and fair elections. I mean that's just mental.
I think
That's
I'm worried that if you get ahead of yourself too much, you won't be able to make it through this chapter.
yeah. Sorry, let's forget the 20th century for a minute. Let's just enjoy the white pills of the what was it, the sort of early 18th century, and
I know it's hard. I know it's hard to forget the 20th century. It is.
I might just skip World War II chapter. I might just opt to skip it. Too traumatic to revisit.
But then you deprive the audience of what they've come to, they want to build up to the to the black pill.
I might just do like a video, like a 1 minute, like a YouTube short, where I just say,
It's
so what
over.
happened? Well, it's over. I just say basically what happened is our prime minister at the time just sold everything to America, and yeah, that was it. And we defeated Mustache Man and funny wonky eye person in Japan. There you go. That's it, everyone. Anyway, let's enough of that. Let's carry on with the book. So so carry on. We have the 1740 to 1748 War of Austrian Succession, yet another dynastic war to prevent the collapse of Austria and the resolute French, the sort of resurrection of French domination. Rather an indecisive war ended by the Treaty of Aachen of 1748. Historians usually describe this treaty as a colourless affair by which both sides handed back their territorial gains of the former war, and so it was as far as concerned territorial gains in Central Europe. But there was a significant exception to this restitution of former gains, which seemed to indicate that by now the British government had fully awakened to the importance of overseas possessions. The naval station at Gibraltar was not handed back to Spain, neither were Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. Good. Ceded by France in 1713, handed back to her. Furthermore, the island of Cape Breton, adjacent to these territories, which handed to have been captured by Great Britain during the war now ending, was not returned to France under the Treaty of Aachen. But taken as a whole, the Treaty of Aachen was certainly an indecisive end to an indecisive war. It must have been abundantly clear to all concerned that neither war nor treaty had finally settled anything at all. The question of British or French supremacy in North America and in India had yet to be fought out. The final showdown could not long be delayed because in both North America and uh, because sorry, the final showdown could not long be delayed because in both North America and India, fighting had never completely ceased. In North America, the French must have realized that they would have to act quickly and drastically if they were not to be ousted completely. The recent British acquisitions of Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, and now Cape Breton threatened to cut Quebec and all French settlements in the St. Lawrence basin completely off from the Atlantic. There was only one thing to be done, and done quickly. In 1748, the very year of the Aachen Treaty, which was supposed to have restored Anglo-French peace, the French in Canada gave short notice to all English settlers west of the Ohio River to get out. The settlers were not the type of men to accept such orders meekly, and desultory fighting at once broke out. The French suffered from the grave disadvantage and disparity in numbers for in all their North American settlements there were not 200,000 white men, whereas the population of the English colonies, despite lack of government support, had leaped to nearly 2 million. Massachusetts had increased its white population during the 11 years 1629 to 1640 from 300 up to 14,000. But against this numerical handicap, the French enjoyed vigorous official backing. They had founded the city of New Orleans that same year, 1748, and were determined at all costs to unite the maritime outlet in their Canadian possession by ensuring that the river Mississippi and its tributaries should forever remain French. They built forts to protect their waterways. Three of these forts uh, played an important part in the coming Anglo-French struggle. They were Fort Niagara near the falls, uh, Ticonderoga, Ticonderoga, where the Hudson River flows out of Lake Champlain, and Fort Duquesne, uh, where Pittsburgh City now stands. In 1754, a force of militia from Virginia, commanded by Major General Washington, uh, and Richard Hilton puts in quotation marks here, then of course a British subject, set out set out to attack uh, Fort Duquesne. Uh, they were forced to surrender at Great Meadows, and Washington was taken prisoner. Not very good, George. Bit of a taking an L there, mate.
No,
Next year,
failing up.
yeah, failing upwards. Next year, a second attempt was made by a larger force under General Braddock. I bet General Braddock got the job done.
Well,
Oh, he did. I don't know. He was killed, wasn't he? During it,
yeah,
I
no.
remember he was killed, wasn't he? This column included some regular troops. They were ambushed by French and Indians in dense wood, about 7 miles short of Duquesne. Braddock had four horses shot under him, and it was himself killed. All his staff, only one was unwounded, and about two-thirds of his troops were killed or wounded. Yeah, so that was a massive L
Yeah,
by Braddock and Washington, because Washington was present as well in that, so that was another L.
yeah.
He's taking a lot of L's. This Washington fellow.
Yes,
Uh,
so is Braddock. They're not looking good at the moment.
I
This
mean,
is
At least Braddock had the courage to die on the battlefield. You know, what did Washington do?
I mean, he
Anyway,
did get 4 horses shot from under him.
well, you know, he has
That's
to charge it as you know, it's those bloody Indians, wouldn't it? Anyway,
yeah.
at this time, England and France were not yet officially at war, but both were shipping reinforcements across the Atlantic. The sham peace could not last long. In the spring of 1756, a squadron carrying French troops was intercepted by Admiral Boscawen, who captured two French ships after a fight. This naval engagement may therefore be said to have touched off the 7 Years' War, though officially declaration only set a seal upon unofficial Anglo-French hostilities, which had been raging for some years, not only in North America but in India too. This 7 Years' War, um, from the point of view of British imperial history, far surpassed in importance than earlier Anglo-French wars, listed a few pages back. It may it may justifiably be called the foundation stone of the British Empire, for by it for by it was decided the question whether Great Britain or France should take the lead in empire building. This war made both Canada and India British and not French. Um, I think that's a correct assessment. I think that this war determined which after Spain, because Spain was in the as we know was in the decline at this point from its from being Spain and Portugal being the first European empires to be in the ascendancy, and this was the struggle for, as the chapter says, struggle for North America. This was Britain, coming out on top and being the world hegemon.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very well put. I think this is a very important war that determines much more than most wars usually do at this time. There, like the amount of land that's traded, well, not traded, that is handed over to the British is uh, incredibly. impressive for the time period.
Yeah, and I think we'll get on to like people like Clive of India. Um, and it was at this time, Connor, that Britain was acquiring, or the under the East Empire Company plus the British military in India, were they would start to acquire, expand, especially in northern India. And I remember reading somewhere that was there was this funny bit where Clive was like taking, he was acquiring territory, or that he was subjugating these Maharajas, and Britain asked him to stop because they didn't have enough bureaucrats to send out there to administer it. And he actually disobeyed an order and went and like captured like it was somewhere in the Punjab or something. So um, yeah, that happened as well. It was just a time of like endless British wins, you know. Um, yeah, so let's continue. Like most of our British wars, this one started with a run of unmitigated British disasters. Due to entirely to stinging of the defense budget during peace. In Canada, a brilliant French general, Montcalm, captured British posts at Oswego and Fort William Henry, and successfully defended Fort Ticonderoga against General Abercrombie with a vastly superior army. In India, shall we we shall see in the next chapter, the British cause suffered several reverses till the tide was turned by the genius of Clive. That's Clive of India, as I referenced earlier on. Um, on the continent of Europe, the British army played, as in most continental wars, a numerical minor part alongside the massive conscript armies of her allies. At first, our only ally was Prussia, with Austria, France, Sweden, and Russia, all ranged on the other side, not um, on the other side. Not for the last time in our history, fate had linked Great Britain with on with an uncongenial partner. For for Prussia at that time was a precocious kingdom, ruled by the unscrupulous and ambitious Frederick II. Um, as a further complication, the Kingdom of Hanover was at that time linked to Great Britain by their common allegiance to one monarch. Um, this, of course, referring to the House of Hanover. Um, the influenced British strategy and led to the first disaster of the land war in Europe. The Duke of Cumberland, Victor of Culloden, and nicknamed Butcher because of the severity used in crushing the Jacobites of the 45, um, was given command of, of a British expeditionary force sent to defend the Kingdom of Hanover. He was outmaneuvered by the French Marshal Saxe. His army, forced back against the North Sea coast near Stade, was obliged to accept the capitulation of Colster Zeven. Um, at sea, an even worse blow marked the first year of official war. Uh, Minorca had been a British naval base since 1713 and was the key to sea power in the Mediterranean, as Malta became later. It fell to French combined operation partly, it was said, because a British fleet under Admiral Byng displayed a lack of offensive spirit. The unfortunate admiral was court-martialed and shot. um, Poor encourager les hautes, as the French cynic Voltaire said. Uh, but one scapegoat was insufficient to quell the storm of indignation that swept across England on account of the general mismanagement of the war. The government was turned out of office, and among new ministers there came the came to the fore William Pitt, the elder, one of those outstanding figures that, despite times often bring to light, amid a welter of third-rate mediocrities. The genius of Pitt, later made Earl of Chatham, lay in his realization of two things. First, that the possession of an oversea empire was most important for Great Britain than the swinging pendulum of continental rivalries. Yes, correct assessment, Pitt based. And secondly, that the key to an overseas empire lay in the command of the seas. Correct. He admitted, as every British statesman must admit, that Great Britain can never remain indifferent to the course of events in continental Europe, but he realized the value of a sense of proportion. In the war now raging on the continent, he saw the British role as that of a financier of continental allies and an encourager of continental coalitions. It was folly to waste the resources of a small island kingdom in maintaining huge armies on the continental scale, whilst there were allies willing enough to fight the land campaign if someone provided them with money and equipment to keep their great armies in the field. A small British expeditionary force must, of course, fight alongside these massive allies, if only to prove the jib that England fights her continental wars to the last drop of blood of her continental allies. Uh, Pitt saw that a small but professional, excellent army was all that Great Britain needed to pull her weight on the continent. All the rest of her energy should be devoted to sea power, with sufficient overseas armies to reap the fruits of sea power and hold them. Once in possession of sea power, Pitt saw that quite small British armies could win colonial campaigns. They could have a uh, un, uh, uninterrupted flow of reinforcements, ammunition, and military supplies to keep them in action, while their adversaries, the French, would receive little or nothing in the way of sea-borne support. With characteristic drive, Pitt recognised the structure of the whole British war effort to fit his conception of correct strategy. This brought him into bad odour with the king, whose Hanoverian sentiments revolted against Pitt's treatment of the Continental War as a diversion of British fighting power. Pitt was thrown out of office for in those days the king still had the last word on who should be his ministers. But so insistent was popular opinion in favour, the one statesman could run the war, that the king soon had to allow Pitt to take charge once more, though under a compromise arrangement which left the Duke of Newcastle as the uh, ostensible premier, while Pitt had the power and did the work. Um, the effect of his leadership and drive became apparent in 1759, 3 years after the official war had started, when the tide of British success suddenly began to flow. At Minden in Hanover, the small but highly trained British contingent of 7 regiments fighting the Prussian army played a leading role in the crushing defeat of the French, thus turning the continental situation from the brink of disaster to stability. At sea, far-reaching success were achieved at Lagos on the Portuguese coast and at uh, Quiberon Bay in Brittany. The British Navy won resounding victories which firmly secured Great Britain for the rest of the 7 Years' War. In complete mastery of the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, the effect of this upon the land campaigns in North America and India was decisive. Um, Connor, have you got anything to add on this bit?
Well, it's just interesting to see. Obviously, Pitt and the king had very different priorities, so it's just interesting to see monarch and prime minister conflict. And yeah, it's in a sense, obviously, it seems that the king was, had the wrong policy or wanted the wrong policy because Pitt did achieve very good results through his policies. But also, it's nice to see sort of um, I don't know, a balance or a level of monarch actually having a personal stake in his kingdom still in Britain.
Yeah, and I think I get from that passage that there was this feeling, Britain is more than your Hanoverian realm, and that we
Yeah,
should now be focusing to the high seas, to the empire, to the thing. And in many ways, that having troops and having a presence in, because if people want to go later on and look up the at that time a map of the Hanoverian realm, it's right. It's not a strategically good place anyway. It's sat in right in sort of upper northern Germany. They would have been surrounded by, well, you would have had your ally with Prussia to the east, but you would have been surrounded around with enemies, and it wouldn't have been easy to have got to get to from Britain in a conflict, especially back then. And the probably the king was, his estates, his family possessions, and everything. And you had Pitt saying, "Yeah, we need to sort of not focus on that," uh, and that obviously annoyed him. And the thing that is, in many ways, Pitt was right, because the problem is, in the on like a military point of view, holding on to that bit of territory while ignoring the rest of your emerging successful imperial territories. Uh, it was a silly thing to do. I mean, I definitely agree with
I
with
think
what Pitt was getting at.
yeah, I think the problem here is when you take on a German dynasty who doesn't have as much connection the with the British mentality. And
I mean, yes,
from
yes,
what I understand, it's George the Second, right?
yeah, George second.
He knew more English than George the First, but still wasn't very English, from what
Yeah,
I remember.
yeah, he could speaking. He was probably he was probably what they say bilingual. He could probably speak both. I mean, you have to remember, Connor, though, in in that time frame, you had the aristocratical court. They would be speaking French. In England, they'd be speaking French. You have the educated bit; they'll be sort of speaking Latin. I mean, Latin was sort of going out of fashion at that point, though. At this point in England, at least. So, yeah, I mean, it, speaking German, yeah, that would have been. It's funny enough. You actually probably had in the aristocracy more sort of a bilingual um, group of people than you would think. Um,
Well, they were the higher educated people. Of course, you would find a sort
yeah,
of larger proportion of people who were more metropolitan in some sense. I mean, uh, the wealth of the British Empire, uh, is part of that is coming out through their m- the sort of the metropolitan nature of
yeah.
what's happening.
But when we get to Victoria and like the height of British power, after the scramble for Africa and everything else, at that point you see a Britain where the aristocracy, I mean, outside the monarchy, but in the aristocracy, don't really speak German. They only speak English, because English is like, that is the God-given divine language. Because when you're the world hegemon, the world empire, that's what you can do. You can set the rules of what Um. So anyway, we'll continue with the chapter. Uh. So, Montcalm, who was I think the French general,
Also,
for
I think it's
Mon
Montcalm.
Montcalm. Okay, let's say Montcalm, French general. For all his brilliance as a military commander, was gradually weighed down by numbers and armaments. Uh, he could not be reinforced from France. His English opponents could get all they needed. Fort Duquesne was the first French post to fall. It was renamed Pittsburgh in honor of the architect of victory. Uh, Louisburg in Cape Breton Island was captured by a combined operation. Uh, Ticotiga, where Montcalm had repulsed Abercrombie the previous year, was captured by General Amherst. Fort Niagara was the next to go. In September 1759, a British fleet entered the St. Lawrence carrying an army of about 8,000 under General Wolfe. Montcalm had drawn back his forces and concentrated them for the defence of Quebec, a place of great natural defensive strength. I believe the natural defense barrier is like these cliffs which were impregnable. The idea is they would be impregnable for an attack from St. Lawrence River. That's what he's referencing. And if you see actually pictures of those cliffs, they are you can see why they would think that. After several days of fruitless reconnaissance to find a weak point in Montcalm's disposition, Wolfe, a daring tactician of 33, adopted a plan of attack in defiance of almost all of the orthodox rules of battle. There was a steep and narrow path from the water's edge up a cliff on the heights of Abraham, a plateau which would give Wolfe's small army enough space to deploy for battle. The advantages was that these heights lay to the west of Quebec, whereas Montcalm's camp lay to the east and beyond the St. Charles River. Surprise was also possible because of the unlikelihood of an attack by such a route. On the other hand, Wolfe ran the risk of being counterattacked while only a part of his army had emerged uh, from the defile. It was a form of attack like very likely to end in disaster if things go wrong, but promising decisive success um, if they go as hoped. Other famous examples of this kind of battle are Jena uh, and Lord Robert's capture of the Pirar Kotal. To pull it off is the mark of extremely courageous general and highly disciplined troops in a good morale, with good morale. Wolfe won. Wolfe won the success which he deserved, but was killed in the moment of victory. Montcalm was killed in the battle as well. Um, it was a battle that decided the fate of North America. The French hold on Canada was ended. No longer were the English settlers of the Atlantic coast threatened with encirclement. When the Seven Years' Wars had ended by the Treaty of Paris, 1763, Great Britain was confirmed in possession of all French territories east of the Mississippi, uh, um, east of the Mississippi, besides the province of Canada itself. All these was won by hard fighting on land as at Quebec, but far more it was won by British ships and sailors. So Connor, do you have anything to? Because that's the end of the chapter now. Do you have anything to add on that point?
No, I don't think so.
No. Um, shall we start chapter 4?
Well, it's up to you if you want to. My only concern would be, do you want to like if we are going to stop in the middle of the next chapter, or
Yeah,
are you okay
that's
with?
what yeah, that's what I'm thinking because the next chapter is again like this one. It's quite a lengthy one. Um, and it goes. I mean, I wanted an American to uh sort of talk about the to read through the American independence chapter. And as you're an American, I thought that because then I can do, because then I can do the British India stuff. It just sort of fits, it works. It
Okay.
works.
So do you
Um,
okay? So do you want me to start?
and you know what? I think we will call it. I think we'll start it next time.
Okay.
Um, because I think, given the hour, given the time, I have a feeling it would. We would end up stopping halfway through a chapter, and I'd like to return to we do a chapter each session.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree.
so I think just to do a summary on that point, what we see here is the emergence of Britain, um, of Britain as a naval power, and through that naval power strength, they managed to, and through like the European dynastic wars, managed to gain. Uh, Outperform Spain and then outperform France and gain North America. And the funny thing is, Connor, I was always taught, there were two British empires. You had the first variant of the British Empire where everything was centered in the Caribbean and North America because the East India Company and in India it was still quite small. It was still quite insignificant when you take like the Martha Confederacy, Mughal Empire, which was still around at that time. It was still it wasn't that sort of Britain wasn't so dominant in that area, and of course in Africa there wasn't a significant presence, or in the Far East. Australia hadn't been discovered at this point. Um, and so we're coming into the realm. Now it's like this is the first British Empire, which is North America. And as we get into the next chapter, Britain ended up losing the 13 colonies. And
Spoiler.
spoiler alert, for all those people who are over 250 odd years late.
Yeah, anybody who's
So
confused about who rules in uh in Boston.
yeah, remember Major George Washington, because he's heavily involved in this multiverse we got going on here.
Alternate worlds. Well, yeah, it will be interesting. Also, given that I assume you've uh been like when you were taught the American Revolution, versus the way I was taught the American Revolution, and it will be interesting to see what the angles were and how it differs.
So, to be absolutely frank, we were taught the American Revolution. We weren't taught about the American Revolution, probably for obvious reasons.
For
We
obvious reasons. Hmm.
Yeah, because uh,
You guys weren't taught
disgraceful
it at
behavior.
all?
No, 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 no. We weren't taught
Really?
it because it wasn't really significant in that sort of sense for the British Empire, because as we will find out, the British Empire really swung around and became the Pax Britannica. It lost the 13 colonies, but it gained ancient civilizations
Yeah, but didn't we
of the
come
Far
to
East.
back to bite you in the butt later?
Well, yes, America did. Yeah,
That's what yeah, so like how is it
I know.
not significant insofar as we came back to bite you in the butt?
Well, the thing though is the story of America has yet to finish, Connor. And on because when we did our previous stream, a lot of things in the world hadn't happened. Um, you know, we that are current events. I mean, that recently there's been a lot of build up with Iran, and the Houthis, and the talk of war is now even more sort of ever present in UK, and I imagine in America as well. It's the build up to conflict, and maybe America might be wiped out. I don't know. I mean, I don't wish any Americans like you, Connor, any harm or anything like that. I'm not that evil. Um,
You're
but
not that evil, but your level of evil, is that what you're saying?
but at the same time, if the American government was like the federal government was to be wiped out, I mean,
People, you
I
wouldn't shed a tear.
it was for me, like the end of Return of the Jedi when you have all like the Ewoks dancing and you have the fireworks around, like, and it shows all the planets celebrating the end of the Empire.
Yeah, that
That
would
that
be
would
you.
that would be me. Yeah.
Well, to be honest, well, in this case, we might be in Coruscant, right? Because the Coruscant's the capital of the Empire, and they're
Yeah, I mean,
celebrating just as much as
I imagine
everybody else
I
is.
well, yeah, I imagine you guys. I mean, I imagine you and the other sort of Americans in that, non-coastal Americans would celebrate that, and um, yeah. The funny thing about it is, though, as we get on, is that um, you know it uh, that America, as we joke about it, America when it got to the 60s, America, it does appear that they regretted their decision of basically forcing Britain to dismantle its empire, because one thing that did happen is Britain had the presence in Africa. It had the sphere of influence in Africa and Asia, the Far East. And when that went, when they said, you must, give these countries independence, America didn't have that power, and that influence, that presence in Africa, in those places. But
Or the
the
knowledge.
Soviets, all the knowledge, yeah. I mean, even to this day, I mean, half the people in the Biden regime are just hopeless. I mean, Americans. I mean, the successful American governments, Republican or Democrat ones, have just been absolutely hopeless on the foreign policy stuff. I mean, the
Well,
only one that was good, I guess, who had a basic level of understanding was Kissinger. Now, whether or not you think he was good or bad, that's up to you to decide. But um, you can't deny he did. But he wasn't really American, though, was he? If we're absolutely honest. In that regard. So, but the thing though was that you had this sort of I'm just trying to think who. I think it was under LBJ and Nixon. You had this sort of regret for what had happened, because they wanted Britain to play a role, but they realised that the British Empire was gone, so it couldn't be that sort of policeman. And in many ways, because on the international stage, America, there was no one else to stand next to America or with America. So in
yeah,
many ways, America would come to regret you Americans would come to regret the decision, especially in Vietnam, because the there was active British government policy not to go into Vietnam because of uh, American behaviour of effectively with us during the whole Suez affair.
yeah. Well, that I mean, yes, the premise that. Well, I think the problem with one. Sorry, there are a lot of problems, but one of the many problems of the American Empire is that the origins of it stem from idealism,
Yes.
and that idealism like seems to like change. It seems to ebb and flow over the course of the time that the American Empire has existed. But someone like LBJ or Nixon, I would say probably weren't idealistic. So of course they come to regret the decisions made by, the Truman government or the Roosevelt government or Wilson government. Like all these governments, all these leaders that were quite idealistic.
I never understood with LBJ because his foreign policy was, I mean, it was okay. It wasn't, notably bad, like say Truman or something. But on domestic policy, LBJ was a complete disaster. I
Yeah.
mean, if we're absolutely honest, it was a complete disaster. I mean, and that's why a lot of people in our circles brand him as the worst president of the last century. Um, I mean, I can understand why you would think that.
Yeah, I can't I mean, LBJ, I think I don't know enough about him, but from what some of my instincts regarding him was that he thought he would be able to control things in a way, but instead everything unraveled in society because of his actions. But he was trying to sort of appease and control when he just kind of lost all control.
Yeah, I mean, you know, he sort of pallied up to the civil rights crowd, and yeah, I mean, we all know what happened from there on out. And I still say to this day, and this will be my sort of, the tragedy of America was really it the overthrow of the wasps in power. I mean, I mean, I know you're a Catholic, Connor, and everything, but I on a serious note, I do think that that was a tragedy, because then, I mean, you then under Reagan, it was then sort of codified in law, and we're now seeing in today the effects of all that, and you see you know um you see what the change that's happening in America and the West, the, I guess you say, the anti-white sentiment, the internalized hatred by members of our own group, and the propaganda that goes with it. And that's all legacy of that happened from the Civil Rights Act. You can draw very and codified in law by and even down to, what is it? You guys have the Martin Luther King Day. I mean,
Yeah.
even that, even though it doesn't, you wouldn't think it'd be connected. It is connected because it erodes. It's a thing that it just further erodes your identity and self of pride and self of purpose.
Did you know that it's the only American holiday that has stayed uh basically as a celebration for the thing that it was intended to be a celebration of?
Oh yeah, and Connor, I tell you now that probably it wouldn't surprise me if it remains if given current trajectory, it'll probably be like the most you know it'll become one of the most important holidays in the American calendar. um
I wouldn't be too sure regarding Mexicans though. I think they wouldn't I think they'll eventually shake that off. I think there'll be a replacement of that because Mex the Hispanic population I don't think cares very much about uh you know that type of person.
I mean, I just find it amazing that you've got, Republicans fawning over a dead black communist. That's
Yeah,
it.
I
Put it
know.
bluntly. I mean,
No, 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 it's very true. It's a sort of a psychological uh, well, brainwashing, to be honest. Though, I mean, when you're only given like bits and pieces of history, you're basically left in the dark, and when you're in the dark, you choose to um s- you choose to be almost utterly ignorant about what really happened. And also, even as a Catholic, it's kind of like when it comes to English culture, generally speaking, I do find English culture is a very strong defense against these types of things. That's why I find myself, reading mostly English authors. Well, obviously, kind of because they speak the same language as me, so that makes it a lot easier. But not so much that, not just that, but English culture has a lot of benefits. And my thing is that I think the wasps are kind of complicit in their own destruction in the United States. So that's my disappointment for them or with them. It's not so much that they were overthrown as they kind of subjected themselves to their own overthrow.
I think with I think in the neocon days of Reagan, I think that would, yeah, I think they did because they got behind him. I think what you know. So I remember I did a deep dive into the whole civil rights. I was into like the whole Sam Francis stuff and looked into the whole what Pat Buchanan and into the civil rights area. And you know, there was a lot of I still say today the Southern Democrats, like the old, I guess you say the Dixiecrat types, who were around at that time and were opposed to it. In my mind, those are the true Americans, if I'm absolutely honest.
Well, I think there were a sizable amount of Republicans that were, I guess there was, yeah, there was a sizable amount of Republicans that were against the Civil Rights Act, including Barry
Yeah,
Goldwater, which is
get
why
back Goldwater. Yeah, yeah.
he was basically obliterated in the press and stuff like that. That led to his loss. I mean, if Barry Goldwater had won, that would have been a real interesting change. Though, the whole thing about, well, the um Dixiecrats, though, is many of them just like kind of like they voted against civil rights, but then they jumped on board immediately afterwards.
Yeah, I mean there was one who was he died in a plane crash, I think, and he was like a Democrat congressman in Georgia. I can't remember his name now. Um, and he didn't jump ship. He sort of stayed with the Democrat Party, but he
No, that's what I'm
was
saying. They stayed. I mean, there
yeah.
was
Oh
this
yeah, a lot.
they
Yeah, a lot of
stayed
them did. Yeah.
with the Democrats with the uh and basically switched sides on on the issue that they had fought against. Like, was it Strong Thurman? Like, he was a Democrat the entire time, even though, you could argue the Democrats took the issue that of civil rights and then shoved it down everybody's throats, and then used it to solidify power.
Yeah, and then
Maybe
you had the George Wallace and his Americas in '68. He of course ran on the what was the American Independence. Well, I've got to remember what the ticket is the party ticket was, but effectively it was the Democratic Party of most of the southern states that sort of uh, joined with him. Um,
Yeah. Anyways, well,
yeah,
I mean, we'll get
yeah, yeah,
into
yeah.
this
Well,
type of thing,
yeah,
well,
but yeah,
some other time.
my we'll get on to that another time. But yeah, I mean, it is interesting. We're going to be coming up to American independence. We're going to be going into the, I guess, the rise of the Second British Empire, and of course, the Napoleonic Wars. I mean, that's going to be the next big scale thing we're going to come on to. And I know in our community, there's been a bit of a lively debate on whether or not the Napoleonic Wars is Britain against France or Britain plus friends, allies against France. I don't know if you saw this debate raging on Twitter at all with Apostolic Majesty and AA Academic Agent at all, Connor.
I think we'll probably end up on the sides of our respected um the I don't know what's the word, like um I don't know. I think I think each of those guys represent more of our opinions than each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Um,
So I
I
think
mean, I'm more interested about the 1812 war because I have tweeted that out, and I've had like a few mixed responses about that, and that one will be an interesting one to get into because I think we might discover the first American, like the first American cope. I think this is actually like a groundbreaking. That's like the first American cope ever discovered.
yeah. Yes,
um,
I think I know what you mean.
yeah, yeah, yes. Anyway, thank you, Connor, for coming on. Thank you, everyone in chat, Iron Duke, Lucas World, and Trickio. Thank you, everyone, and everyone watching later on. Yeah, we'll continue with this series. Next chapter will be the American War of Independence. So see you all then, and thanks for everyone. And check out Plotlines on YouTube. Subscribe to both our channels, and have a good night, everyone. Cheers.